Hey guys, and welcome back. We are going to talk about biodiversity today, and we have a lot to cover, so this might be a little bit longer of a flipped video. So please feel free to speed me up if you need to. So, with biodiversity, we are still looking at Georgia Standard of Excellence SB5, but we are focusing on SB5A. So, SB5, of course, is looking at the interdependence of all organisms on one another and their environment. And A has us looking at data to support explanations about factors that affect biodiversity and populations and ecosystem. So you should be able to identify limiting factors that affect biodiversity. You should be able to explain how population dependent factors in an ecosystem lead to changes in that ecosystem. You should be able to interpret population graphs and determine a population's carrying capacity. And you should be able to assess the interdependence of all organisms on one another and their environments. So, biodiversity, we've mentioned previously in one of our Amoeba Sisters video, but they mentioned that it is the number and variety of life forms living in a given area. And greater biodiversity is much better for an organism and for a population than having less biodiversity would be. So there's three big types of biodiversity. We have species biodiversity, we have genetic biodiversity, and we have ecological biodiversity. So species biodiversity is the number of different kinds of organisms in a specific area. So that's all the different species found in an area. Genetic biodiversity is the variety of genes in the gene pool of a given species. So that's how many different genes do they have. And then ecological diversity has to do with the complexity of the ecosystem. How involved and complex are food webs, trophic levels, ecological niches, and energy flow? So first up, we're going to focus on populations. A population we know is a group of the same species living in the same place at the same time. Populations can increase or decrease over time. They can increase through births and immigration, moving into an area, and they can decrease through deaths and emigration or exiting an area. So some biotic and abiotic factors that can affect populations include predators, lack of foods, major weather events, diseases, overhunting, overfishing. There's so many more than that, but those are just some really good examples. These are what are known as limiting factors because they basically kind of control the population size. Carrying capacity is this majorly important concept about how much an ecosystem can sustain, how many organisms can live there and get everything that they need. So let's watch this video.
A simple water mold in the 1800s resulted in a disease called the potato blight and destroyed much of the potato crop in Ireland. Since many Irish people depended on potatoes as their staple food, mass starvation and immigration resulted. This caused Ireland's population to dramatically decrease. Lack of food is one factor that impacts an ecosystem or habitat's carrying capacity. Welcome to Moo Moo Math and Science and the carrying capacity of an environment. The maximum number of individuals in a species that an environment can support for the long term is the carrying capacity. Carrying capacity is limited by limiting factors such as food, water, shelter, appropriate space, as well as disease, predation, and climatic conditions. If a population nears the carrying capacity, resources become limited, and if a population exceeds the carrying capacity, deaths begin to outnumber births. Let's take a look at the fish family that lives in the fish bowl. Life is plentiful. There's plenty of space, there's food to eat, there's energy from the sun, and they're able to reproduce rapidly. However, as they reproduce, the resources begin to become limited. They're limited by space and the amount of food. However, they're still able to reproduce. Eventually, there are so many fish that some of the fish begin to die off because there's not food to eat and the space is limited by the size of the tank. They have reached the carrying capacity. When a population approaches its carrying capacity, the rate of increase usually slows and the birth rate equals the death rate. The curve plotted for this type of growth is S-shaped and shows a period of increasing growth rate followed by leveling off as the population approaches carrying capacity. Let's take a look at the carrying capacity of a typical black bear habitat. The black bear habitat limits black bear populations through the influences of shelter, food supply, and social tolerances of the species. Shelter or cover is a prime factor. Black bears need cover for feeding, hiding, bedding, traveling, and raising cubs. With limits of space, adult bears will kill young bears or run them out of an area. These young bears must keep moving around either until they die or until they find an area vacated by the death of an adult. When food supplies are reduced by competition, it becomes very intense. Some adult bears might temporarily move to seldom used areas of their home range, and sometimes many miles away. They must live on what food is available in the area. These individuals may become thin and in poor condition for winter hibernation, or in the case of young bears, be forced from the area by more aggressive adults. So in summary, populations cannot grow exponentially indefinitely. Exploding populations always reach a size limit imposed by the shortage of one or more factors such as water, space, or food, or by adverse conditions such as disease, drought, and temperature extremes. If you'd like to know more about carrying capacity, this playlist will help. And as always, thanks for watching, and Moo Moo Math uploads a new.
All right, so with carrying capacity, there are a couple of factors that affect it. One of those factors is density dependent. The other one is density independent. So density dependent, these are factors that are more likely to affect the population as the population increases. This is things like stress, competition for resources, predation, spread of disease, etc. The more closely together the population lives, the more difficult it is to survive with these different things: predation, competition, disease, etc. Density independent, on the other hand, has no difference regardless of the population size. These are things like fires, weather, natural catastrophes, tornadoes, floods, hurricanes, etc. It doesn't matter if you are affecting a town of 500 or a city of 500,000. If there is a fire that breaks out and rages through the area, it's going to affect everybody in the area, regardless of if you have 500 or you have 500,000. Whereas if we're looking at something like disease spread, if we have 500, we're able to kind of spread out a little bit more and maybe not pass that disease from one person to the next as much. The more we live closer together in direct relationship with one another, the more likely it is that we can spread those diseases. So that's the difference in density dependent factors and density independent factors. Now we're going to think about communities. So communities are where different organisms interact with one another. So each organism has a role or a niche within its community. So I want you to think about some of the different interactions that can occur between an organism and between organisms in a community. Ecologists, part of what they do is study these interactions. They want to know how these communities interact with one another. How do these organisms interact with one another? And what is the impact of this effect and this interaction? So some ways that things interact with one another: there's predation, there's competition, fighting over resources, and then there's symbiosis. And we're going to talk more in depth about symbiosis, but symbiosis are things like mutualism, commensalism, and parasitism. So those are three ism words that you want to make sure that you know what they mean. So first up, we're going to talk about competition. Competition is where two organisms struggle with one another. Could be more than two, but at least two organisms are struggling with one another to utilize the same limited resource. We've got a couple of options here with types of competition. There's interspecies competition. That's competition between two completely different species. They're fighting over food, they're fighting over habitat, but they're totally different species. Then we have intra-species competition. That's competition between organisms that are of the same species. They could still be fighting over food or habitat, but they can also be fighting over mates because within a species, they can mate with one another. So it could be that the organisms are fighting to be able to win the mate so that they can pass on their genes. Then we have predation, which is exactly what it sounds like, one organism trying to come after another one. Then we have symbiosis. And symbiosis is just organisms that live together. They have some sort of an interaction. They're different species within a community. And this interaction could be good for both. Mutualism, like bees getting nectar, flowers getting pollinated, that's a good thing for both. It could be beneficial for one species, but not for the other. So whales and barnacles live on the bottom of whales. They get food from whatever the whale doesn't eat, but the whale doesn't get anything good. It also doesn't get anything bad. And then the last one is parasitism. So parasitism is where one organism gets something good. In the case of the example that you can see here, the tick is getting something good. It's getting food. The cat, on the other hand, is getting hurt. It's getting skin irritation. It could get a disease from the tick. Sorry, excuse me, guys. So let's check out this video on symbiotic relationships.
Welcome to Moo Math and Science. In this video, let's take a look at symbiosis. Symbiosis describes a close interaction between two or more different species. In this video, I will focus on three types. They are mutualism, in which both organisms benefit, commensalism, in which one organism benefits and the other is neither helped nor harmed, and parasitism, in which one benefits and the other is harmed, or maybe even killed. Okay, let's look at some examples of mutualism. First, each one of us has a personalized collection of bacteria called a microbiome living within us. This microbiome or bacteria break down carbohydrates and toxins. They help us absorb fatty acids, and they also protect your cells in the intestines from invading pathogens. In return, the bacteria get a nice place to live and food to eat. Next, termites. Termites are nature's recyclers, and they break down the cellulose of trees and decaying wood. However, the termites cannot digest this cellulose themselves. Instead, they depend on one-celled protozoa. These protozoa live in the stomachs of the termites, and in return, they get food to eat and a place to live. So again, it's a win-win. Next is commensalism. Remember, one benefits and the other is neither helped nor harmed. Hermit crabs live in the shells of once abandoned snails. This relationship helps the hermit crab because it gives them some protection, but these snails don't really care. Next, squirrels. They live and stay in trees for protection, yet the tree is neither helped nor harmed. Next, you have these tiny little mites, and they hitch a ride on flies. The mites are equipped with some type of method to grip onto the insect, and they get transported around. This phloretic mite is just a hitchhiker and does not feed during this time of being carried around. The mites receive transportation, but the fly is neither helped nor harmed. And finally, we have parasitism. One benefits, yet the other is harmed. Lampreys, which are these strange-looking primitive fish, have a very limited digestive system. They attach and feed on the body of other fish with more advanced digestive systems, and many times it will lead to the death of the host fish. This next one falls under life is strange. A cuckoo, which is a bird, lays its eggs in a warbler's nest. The cuckoo young will knock the warbler's eggs out of the nest when they're born, and then the warbler will raise the cuckoo's young. Not very nice. So there we go, a look at some types of symbiosis and symbiotic relationships. Thanks for watching, and moo moo.
All right, guys. So that is symbiosis. Next up, we're going to talk about keystone species. So, keystone species are species that are so important to the health of the community and the ecosystem because they provide a vital role in keeping the ecosystem balanced. If we get rid of this keystone species, whatever it happens to be, then you're going to wind up having issues because the ecosystem could collapse. So let's check out a video on keystone species and then we'll talk about a specific one, the sea otter.
Hey there, nature enthusiast. Welcome back to What's Z. Today, we're diving into the fascinating world of keystone species, the unsung heroes of our ecosystems. Now, you might be wondering, what exactly is a keystone species? Well, stick around because by the end of this video, you'll be amazed at their crucial role in maintaining the balance of our natural world. First off, let's define it. A keystone species is an organism that has a disproportionately large impact on its environment relative to its abundance. Essentially, they hold the ecosystem together. Think of them as the glue that keeps everything from falling apart. One classic example is the sea otter. These playful creatures might look cute, but they're fierce protectors of kelp forests. How? By feasting on sea urchins, which, left unchecked, can decimate kelp populations. Without sea otters, these underwater forests could vanish, taking with them countless marine species that depend on them. Then, there's the African elephant. These gentle giants are known as ecosystem engineers. They shape their habitat in numerous ways, from digging water holes that all animals can drink from to spreading seeds far and wide. Without elephants, many of Africa's savannas would look drastically different, with fewer trees and less biodiversity. Another remarkable example is the gray wolf in Yellowstone National Park. After being reintroduced in the 1990s, wolves have helped restore balance by controlling the elk population. This change allowed overgrazed vegetation to recover, which in turn benefited a host of other species, including beavers and birds. It's a brilliant example of how one species can trigger a cascade of positive ecological effects. But it's not just animals. Certain plants and fungi also play keystone roles. For example, the Brazil nut tree in the Amazon rainforest supports a variety of wildlife through its fruit, while also relying on specific bees for pollination. Remove this tree, and the whole complex web of interdependent species could collapse. So why should we care about keystone species? Because their presence or absence can completely alter an ecosystem. Protecting these species means preserving the intricate balance of our natural world. Without them, we risk losing the incredible diversity of life that makes our planet so unique. I hope this gives you a new appreciation for these ecological rock stars. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe for more fascinating insights into the natural world. And hey, if you have any questions,
All right, guys. So with those keystone species, one of the big ones that we like to talk about is the sea otter in a kelp forest. So in a kelp forest community, which is a community, of course, in the ocean, sea otters prey upon sea urchins. That's their main source of food. The sea urchins prey upon the kelp. If the sea otter was removed from this community completely, so if we got rid of the sea otter, what's going to happen? Well, the only thing that eats sea urchins besides the sea otters are sea stars. And sea stars have lots of other food sources. That means that this sea urchin is going to become overpopulated and then it's going to eat all of the kelp because that's its only food source. So the sea otters disappearing means that ultimately over time the kelp is going to disappear as well. And if the kelp disappears, guess what? There's no food for anything in this particular community, which means the whole thing is going to collapse. This is actually something that nearly did happen. In the late 1800s, sea otters were hunted all the time because they have very, very soft fur. They were nearly driven extinct through this process. And as their numbers decreased, the sea urchin numbers increased, and the kelp forest communities began to disappear completely. So now, after scientists discovered that was happening, sea otters are now protected by federal laws. You're not allowed to hunt them at all. You're not even allowed to harass them. And as a result of that law, their numbers have dramatically increased and the kelp forests are beginning to stabilize as well. But it has taken a very long time. All right. And then the very last thing we're going to talk about today are invasive species. And these are species that are not native to an area that have been introduced to the area either by natural activities or by human activities. Invasive species are a huge problem because they disrupt the balance of the community and the ecosystem, and they reduce the overall biodiversity because they compete with or they prey upon native species, and they don't have anything that preys upon them. Some examples: the Burmese python. Guys, if you have ever heard about the pythons in the Everglade forest, the Burmese python are a huge problem in the Everglade forest. Green iguanas are a problem. Lionfish, bufo toads, fire ants. Fire ants are not natural to the United States, but they're here. And kudzu. I'm assuming that you guys have heard about kudzu, but kudzu is a plant that is native to Japan. It was brought to the US to help control erosion and to be a fancy porch plant. And it has taken over because nothing in the US eats kudzu. So we can't kill it. We can't get rid of it because nothing naturally eats it. So let's check out this video on invasive species.
Massive vines that blanket the southern United States, climbing as high as 100 feet as they uproot trees and swallow buildings. A ravenous snake that is capable of devouring an alligator. Rabbit populations that eat themselves into starvation. These aren't horror movie concepts, they're real stories. But how could such situations exist in nature? All three are examples of invasive species, organisms harmful not because of what they are, but where they happen to be. The kudzu vine, for example, had grown quietly in its native East Asia, eaten by various insects and dying off during the cold winters. But its fortunes changed when it was imported into the southeastern United States for porch decoration and cattle feed. Its planting was even subsidized by the government to fight soil erosion. With sunny fields, a mild climate, and no natural predators in its new home, the vine grew uncontrollably until it became known as the plant that ate the South. Meanwhile, in Florida's Everglades, Burmese pythons, thought to have been released by pet owners, are the cause of decreasing populations of organisms. They're successfully outcompeting top predators, such as the alligator and panther, causing a significant reduction in their food sources. They're not a problem in their native Asia because diseases, parasites, and predators help to control their population size. And in Australia, European rabbits eat so many plants that they wipe out the food supply for themselves and other herbivores. They're a pretty recent addition, intentionally introduced to the continent because one man enjoyed hunting them. Like the Burmese pythons, various factors in their native habitat keep their numbers in control. But in Australia, the lack of predators and a climate perfect for year-long reproduction allows their populations to skyrocket. So why does this keep happening? Most of the world's ecosystems are the result of millennia of co-evolution by organisms, adapting to their environment and each other until a stable balance is reached. Healthy ecosystems maintain this balance via limiting factors, environmental conditions that restrict the size or range of a species. These include things like natural geography and climate, food availability, and the presence or absence of predators. For example, plant growth depends on levels of sunlight and soil nutrients. The amount of edible plants affects the population of herbivores, which in turn impacts the carnivores that feed on them. And a healthy predator population keeps the herbivores from becoming too numerous and devouring all the plants. But even minor changes in one factor can upset this balance, and the sudden introduction of non-native organisms can be a pretty major change. A species that is evolved in a separate habitat will be susceptible to different limiting factors, different predators, different energy sources, and different climates. If the new habitat's limiting factors fail to restrict the species' growth, it will continue to multiply, outcompeting native organisms for resources and disrupting the entire ecosystem. Species are sometimes introduced into new habitats through natural factors like storms, ocean currents, or climate shifts. The majority of invasive species, though, are introduced by humans. Often this happens unintentionally, as when the zebra mussel was accidentally brought to Lake Erie by cargo ships. But as people migrate around the world, we have also deliberately brought our plants and animals along, rarely considering the consequences. But now that we're learning more about the effects of invasive species on ecosystems, many governments closely monitor the transport of plants and animals and ban the imports of certain organisms. But could the species with the most drastic environmental impact be a group of primates who emerged from Africa to cover most of the world? Are we an invasive species?
All right, guys. Well, that is everything that I have for you for the biodiversity video. I know that it was a lot. I apologize for that. But hopefully tomorrow's video won't be as bad. Let me know if you have any questions, and I will see you for our class session coming up soon. Bye, guys.